I would like to invite Nancy for her presentation. אני רוצה לציין שהיא תשתמש בביטוי workforce, שזה אפשר לתרגם את זה בעברית לעובדים, באופן הכללי ביותר, גם לעובדי השדה, גם למנהלים. זה, לפעמים בעברית זה עלול להישמע קצת אולי מעליב, אבל באנגלית זה ביטוי מאוד מוכר, אז אין בזה שום תחושה של פגיעה בכבוד של העובדים, לקרוא להם כוח העבודה או משהו בנוסח הזה, אז רק כדי להבהיר את המושג הזה.
Good morning. Now, in the United States, when a speaker says good morning, the audience responds as well. So how would you respond? Good morning. Ah, great. Oh, that's true. I should have said it in Israeli, in Hebrew. I am honored to be here and really appreciate the invitation and the involvement of the Xarov Institute and the work that we've been doing this week, and especially Rami and Hillel for their leadership and for the support of the entire Institute staff. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I feel like Professor Rosenfeld's previous discussion leads perfectly into the presentation that I want to make now. This presentation is framed by the work I did along with 7 other universities from 2003 to 2008 on a series of projects funded by the U.S. Children's Bureau out of concern for the turnover in child welfare staff that had been increasing over the last decades. And I understand that turnover is not such a problem in Israel, but in the United States, agencies were experiencing as much as 75% turnover a year. And the Children's Bureau funded these projects to look at the factors involved in the turnover. And I was privileged to participate in a project at the University of North Carolina. And I think what we learned and the work that we did has implications for looking at training and preparation of social work staff to support the delivery of evidence-based or evidence-informed practices. Because it is the retention of the workforce and the desirable workforce, I would say, it is the retention of that workforce that allows effective practices to develop and build and continue. And out of that work that we did, the Children's Bureau has recently funded a 5-year project called the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute, and that is the logo that you see on our slides. And at the bottom of each slide is our website, www.ncwwi.org. And I would invite you to go to that website and see the various activities that we're carrying out to support the workforce in the delivery of effective services. What I want to talk about is the impact of worker turnover on children, youth, and families very briefly, and then talk about what research has told us and what we learned in our projects about the retention of child welfare staff and how it does impact the effectiveness of the workforce. And I will also talk about evidence-informed retention practices, including the training of the workforce. Just one slide that briefly describes the damaging impact that turnover has on the very people that we're hoping to help in child welfare. Things like delay in timely investigations, which are obviously detrimental. The longer you wait to investigate a report of abuse or neglect, the more at risk the child and family are. And a study that was done in the state of Wisconsin showed that the more workers a family had or a child had when the child came into the foster care system, the longer that child stayed in foster care. We also know that worker turnover contributes to higher rates of foster care re-entry, and most disturbingly, to more incidents of maltreatment recurrence. There's a direct relationship between turnover rates and higher rates of abuse and neglect. I present this this model as a framework for the discussion that I want to have with you in the next few minutes. And I realize that I'm keeping you from your break, or I'm standing between you and the break, so we will move quickly through these ideas. But this is a slide from the National Implementation Research Network in the United States that focuses on how do you look at implementation of evidence-based practices as they relate to improved outcomes for children and families. And that there are implementation drivers. On the left side, you see the competency drivers. The competency drivers have to do with the work that the staff actually do in implementing evidence-based practices from the practitioner or the clinician with individual clients and families. On the right side of the triangle is the systems, the organizational drivers, systems intervention, facilitative administration, and then the right kind of data to make those kinds of decisions. And underneath everything is the leadership that is so important in the ability of an organization to drive the implementation of practices that are effective with children, youth, and families. So I'm going to talk about the organizational drivers, including supervision and the organizational climate, and then implications for developing the competencies of the workers who are involved in the delivery of services. What do we know about child welfare retention that provides some ideas of how people make a difference in the lives of children, youth, and families? Well, there are two primary conditions that do work to maintain the workforce and prevent turnover, and these have to do with supervision and organizational climate, which we will talk about in just a minute. Other factors like the characteristics of the worker, the education of the worker, the experiences of the worker, the human caring attitudes of the worker, those make a difference, but they're not as significant as these organizational conditions of supervision and organizational climate. And that's a good thing, because we can change the way supervisors supervise, and we can change the climate of an organization, and we'll talk about that. So let's look at supervision as a retention tool. And it's supervision, I would say, is also an effectiveness tool. And in a systematic review that was conducted in 2005, good supervision proved to be the single most important factor in the ability of an organization to retain good staff. But also the quantity of supervision affects job satisfaction, which is a direct link with retention. In the National Survey of Child and Adolescent Well-Being, looking at a very large sample, representative sample of child welfare staff, those who had at least 2 hours of contact with the supervisor per week expressed higher levels of job satisfaction than those who had less time with their supervisors. The quality of supervision counts, and here perhaps is an answer to some of your concerns. Supervisors who care about the well-being of their staff, who treat them and respect them as individuals, as people, rather than as mechanistic bureaucrats, really who understands and knows the personality of each one of the workers in their team. Those supervisors, that creates the kind of quality of supervision that increases the chance that workers in the unit will stay. And then I think this is related to something that Professor Rosenfeld was talking about in terms of fostering on-the-job learning. At the supervisor level, it is the competence of the supervisor in knowing case practices, in clinical practice, in knowing how to educate their team and provide and promote the peer learning that is really, really important. It's the collective learning, ongoing collective learning, and providing learning companions in terms of the team that they supervise that does make a difference as well. But the supervisor's competence and ability to coach and educate and take advantage of their own clinical experience to educate their workers in how to perform on the job is also very important. In terms of the organizational climate, which is the collective perception that employees have of their work environment, how do they perceive the decision-making activities in an organization? How do they perceive the mission of that organization? How do they perceive the organization's ability to recognize and reward the work they do? Those kinds of climate conditions influence whether staff will stay or not. And staff are more likely to stay if there's a congruence between their own mission and their values in helping people and the mission of the organization. Are we here to provide support to families, to create well-being, or are we here to regulate and control other people? Staff who stay also want to work in an organization that we call a learning organization, that they are constantly being able to develop their own professional expertise, that they're supported by an organization who values learning, who values the collective peer support for moving the profession forward in terms of knowing what to do and how to do it. A lot of the conditions, again, that Professor Rosenfeld talked about earlier. And based on their learning and their expectations of performance, staff who get clear feedback on their performance are more likely to want to stay. They want to do a good job. They care, they know, but they also want to do things that help other people. Staff who stay, who perceive opportunities for advancement, so they know what to do, they're able to do it. How can they use this in their own career development? And then people want to be recognized for doing a good job. Does the organization value me as a contributor to the mission of the organization and its ability to be effective with children, youth, and families? And again, the feeling respected as individual staff members. So in sum, organizations that are able to create the kind of atmosphere and climate that holds on to those workers who are important contributors to the mission of that organization, are clear about their mission, they're driven by their mission, they are performance-based, they have high expectations, but they provide the support to the staff to be able to perform at the level that is expected. And finally, these are affirming organizations. They reward, they reward, they reward. Now, these are the correlates of retention and the descriptions of the kinds of organizations and supervision practices that help people to stay. What I now want to turn to are the question of what interventions can we develop that increase retention and impact effectiveness. So I will now focus briefly on 4 specific interventions. The first 2 interventions look at impacting supervision, and the second 2 look at the impact of organizational changes on retention. The recruitment and retention project that I did in the state of North Carolina in the United States was a randomized clinical trial of some sort. We did a random assignment of 17 34 counties actually, to 17 counties that implemented the intervention that we were focused on, and then 17 control counties. The intervention was a training intervention focused on the supervisor. We thought that if we could improve the practices of supervisors in certain behaviors, that the workers' turnover would decrease and their retention rate would increase. So we had specific training of those supervisors and some of their managers on recruitment of the right kind of staff, the selection of staff who were able to function in the child welfare arena, and then the retention of staff through the activities that the supervisors and skills of those supervisors for retaining their staff. We also developed toolkits, and recognizing that people don't learn just from coming to training, but they have to, their new learning has to be supported by technical assistance and coaching, ongoing support back in the agencies which we provided. We collected two types of data, some survey information from workers about how their perceptions might have changed over the 5 times we administered the survey, and then looking at the human resources data, administrative data, to see who actually stayed and who actually left. We found significant improvements for the intervention groups on these scales, but the ones that I think I would like to highlight have to do with self-efficacy. The workers, now these were the workers reporting, they actually felt that they were doing a better job as a result of their supervisors having more skills. They were actually more committed to the organization. They felt that their supervisors were more competent in their ability to help them implement practices, and that the supervisor again was more able to facilitate the learning within a team setting. This survival curve sample shows that the intervention group was more successful in holding on to that workers from the intervention group were retained significantly more often than those in the control group. 44% more likely to stay in their jobs compared with workers from the control group. The second study that I want to briefly mention has to do with an evidence-based practice that was being implemented in the state of Oklahoma. And one of the researchers was concerned about the impact of this implementation on retention of staff, thinking that many times professional staff don't like to be told exactly what to do, and they don't like to be monitored to see if they're doing it. So the hypothesis was, well, will these staff who are participating and delivering the evidence-based practice called safe care, will they stay or will they leave? What is the impact of this practice on retention? And they looked at the practice, which was safe care, with and without fidelity monitoring, with somebody watching what they were doing and monitoring their progress or their fidelity to the evidence-based practice, or without, and then services as usual, both with and without monitoring. And it was found that there was greater staff retention in the condition where the evidence-based practice was implemented along with fidelity monitoring. But I think the key point that I want to make is that this monitoring was presented to staff as supportive consultation. It was not regulatory. It was not bureaucratic. You must do this and then you must do that. It was, how can I help you be effective using this evidence-based practice in a very supportive, consultative way on the part of the supervisors. So I think the message here is that workers want to do a good job. They want to have the kind of impact that with their families and youth and children that make a difference in the lives of very troubled people. And learning new skills can be motivators for workers to actually come to work in that organization and stay there. Just briefly, the two organizational interventions that targeted the organizational climate include a study that, or a trial that Professor Charles Glisson at the University of Tennessee was implementing called Availability, Responsiveness, and Continuity Intervention. He used a series of activities to improve the climate of several organizations and compared it with other organizations that did not have that same focus, changing the way decisions were made, changes in the way that people participated in making decisions about their own practice, as well as what was going on in the organization, teaching teams, team building, and how to work together in teams. I think that the important thing is by changing the organizational climate, workers were more likely to stay in the agency. And that also happened in a New York State project to implement what they call design teams. And these were teams of people across the whole organization, workers, supervisors, administrators, again, to focus on how can we make the working environment, the climate of our organization, how can we improve what we do together in this organization. And retention was influenced by this intervention at the organizational level. So we come back to, we've talked about the organizational drivers for implementation in terms of supervision and organizational climate. I want to briefly go to the competency drivers and focus specifically on training and coaching. Now, in this NERN model, selection is very important. How you select for people who are able to be open to learning new practices, being able to participate in this learning for success approach, and selecting for people who have the particular skills related to a specific evidence-based practice. But I want to talk about these staff development activities specifically related to training and coaching. We do a lot of training in the United States. We do it before people come into the job or into their specific job called pre-service. We do it as they are part of the workforce in service. We also do it in preparation of social workers in social work universities, and I don't want to forget that piece of the whole training. But the best practices that we've learned about training come out of the adult education field and adult learning principles, where the content of the learning is based on what the person, the adult, wants to know. How motivated are they to want to learn something new? Well, they're motivated because they want to do a better job with their families and children. They're motivated because they're in an organization that expects them to be high performing. So those are the motivators that we take advantage of when we work with people in-service training, and those are the expectations that are laid out in pre-service training. But unless training is skills-based, unless it really focuses on developing those unique skills and capabilities called for in child welfare, it's not going to be useful, and people are not going to be able to successfully perform on their jobs. And some of the skill-based activities you already know, behavioral rehearsals, being able to put yourself in a certain situation where you are called upon to make a judgment, to deliver and to work with a client in a way that produces outcomes that you hope to achieve. And being able to rehearse those in a training setting using coaches and trainers who are trained to deliver education and training in that particular way is really important. Also, it's important to have feedback. And that's where supervisors are key as well. The knowledgeable feedback providers make it possible for the person to learn from what they're doing and be able to do it better. And I agree again with Professor Rosenfeld that it is the success that you want to support, that it's been shown that when you give examples in a training situation of the wrong thing to do, hopefully to compare it to the right thing, it actually works against the preparation of the staff for doing the right thing. So always to show the right thing, what is successful, what is possible to make a difference is the best way, the best approach to give to training people. Here's the supervision and coaching that is really important too, to teach effective practice, to support and ensure fidelity to a particular approach, and to increase staff satisfaction, because all of this is premised on the belief that I have and that has been shown that people do want to do a good job and can be helped to do that and participate in evidence-based practices and other kinds of practices that do make a difference in the lives of children, youth, and families. So thank you very much for this opportunity.